Okay, so welcome. This is going to be the first in at least two parts, giving you an inside look at the library's collections that are useful for people doing their genealogy research. Some of it you might be a little familiar with. Some of it I think is going to surprise you. We've got some really fantastic hidden treasures in our collections. So we're going to start with the city directories. These are pretty well known. You can find some of these online using Ancestry. And we do have a free Ancestry account you can use at the library on our computers here. But we have the actual physical directories. We have a complete set of directories from 1868 until the 1980s. So here's what they look like on our shelves in our storage area. So this is something where if you want to use these at the library, you have to ask at the reference desk in the main reading room and let them know you're looking for specific things, and they'll bring them upstairs for you to use in the main reading room. The directories each year, it's kind of like a phone book before there were phone books. So each year that the directory was published, it gives you information about who lived in Waterbury and where they lived in Waterbury. The earliest ones are slim little volumes because there weren't that many people here. So here we are, 1868 to 1869, general directory for the city of Waterbury. All of the cities had these. The larger towns had these. Little small towns might not have them. And this is what the early ones look like. So it's alphabetical, showing you everyone who lived here. The catch is, however, that during the 1860s, 1870s, they're only going to give you the man of the house. They're going to give you the head of household. They're not going to list everyone who lives in that household. So for the earlier years, if you're trying to figure out both a husband and a wife, you might have trouble finding them in the directories. The other thing that I would point out about this time period, not in Waterbury. In Waterbury, everyone is straightforward alphabetical order, but I have seen city directories from, I think, New Haven. There were a few years where New Haven had a segregated directory. So if someone was Black, they would be in the back of the city directory. So you have to check for that because sometimes they did some interesting little things. The city directories also are a business directory. So they will list the businesses by the type of business. Those sometimes they're in front, sometimes they're in the back. You have to kind of look around each year to see where they put it. So this can give you additional information if you're looking for someone who owned a business. 1911, by 1911, the city directory's gotten pretty big. Some issues still have the original map that was in them. But in 1911, they added a new feature. In 1911, they added the street directory. They're actually calling it the Waterbury House Directory is what they called it in 1911. So in addition to having everyone alphabetical like you would in a phone book, it also shows you street by street who lives at each house, each address on the street. This is really helpful if you're trying to figure out an extended family. A lot of times you'll have multiple generations of a family who'll be living next door to one another. You may have cousins who are living next door to one another. So you'll be able to pull all that information by looking at this directory. For the Waterbury City directories, this street guide is usually printed on pink paper that is in the middle of the directory. And that, as I said, again, started in 1911. So here's a zoom in so you can see a little bit more of what you're going to find for this. So on Adams Street, and it tells you where the street numbering starts based on the cross streets, which can be helpful if you want to actually look for a specific house, because sometimes the street numbers have changed over the decades. So it will tell you, for number 30, it'll tell you everyone who lives there. Those are presumably going to be separate apartments that you're looking at. So you'd be looking at a multifamily home with different apartments. And again, it's not telling you everyone who lives there necessarily, but it will tell you the head of the household. 1915, they add another feature, which is just kind of a fun little thing, which is that they add a little asterisk to tell you who has a telephone, which was, it's 1915. That's a pretty big deal. So it's a fun little thing that you can see in, again, the street guide, as it's now being called. So it's just a cute little thing, give you a little bit of information. Doctors were among the first to get telephones for obvious reasons for their work. But, just one of those cute little things that they have. So here, again, those pink pages that are that street guide that give you the bigger picture of who lives in a building, who lives in a community. And more, in some cases, it'll tell you as well, what their business is. It will tell you, again, the little asterisk tells you whether or not they have a phone number. It shows you where the cross streets intersect, which again is helpful if the street numbering has changed since this was done. So looking at the actual street directory pages here, to give you a sense of the type of information that you're going to find in here. Let me go back, going the wrong direction here. So it's going to give you now, in the 20th century, it's going to give you more information about everyone who lives in the house. It might show you, whoops, I did it again. Sorry about that. It might show you all of the people now when you get into the early 1900s, everyone who lives in a household who's at least, a teenager. So it will show you students, it will show you people who are employed, it will show you people who aren't employed, and it will tell you what their occupation is. So when you get into those early 1900s, it can tell you a huge amount of information. One of the research projects that we assisted somebody with recently, they were trying to trace I forget now if it was the grandfather or the great-grandfather, who was married multiple times, lived in Waterbury, left Waterbury, moved to Waterbury, left Waterbury. And the city directory was able to show us so much more information about exactly what that grandparent had been doing, who his wife was. It was like his second wife and his third wife. And those both wives were still in Waterbury, and when he lived with which one, and all of that complexity. The city directory gives you that level of detail that you might not find somewhere else. When you're looking at the city directory, you do want to also check the contents, table of contents. It'll give you some clues as to where to go to find information and how the whole thing is laid out. Each year they do it differently. The abbreviations are important. They use a lot of abbreviations in the city directory, so you definitely want to check that. It's usually right at the beginning. And zooming in on the abbreviations, so you can see some of them are things like, an abbreviation for the alley, for a court, north, rear, road, but then also abbreviations for the major companies, which is where someone might have been employed. And then again, the business directory. Now in 1915, quite a lot of businesses. And for things like grocers, for nurses, it's really just going to be a list of individual people and the address for the business. City government. If you think that somebody might have been, for example, a firefighter, this would be a great place to look for that information. Question in our chat here. The city directories, this is one thing that always comes up. When did they actually take the information down? And I can't remember off the top of my head. I think that they do usually indicate when they did this survey, and it is a lot like the census in order for them to confirm all of this information. But I don't remember if it's the same time every year or if it varies depending on the publisher. Teachers also would be listed. So 1915 by school, telling you the location of the school, the principal, assistant principal, and listing all of the teachers at that school. Notary public, I mean, even something like that, you know, there's a lot of little bits and pieces of information that can be gleaned from the city directories. So next up, municipal records. Sounds very tedious and boring, but you can find some good stuff in the municipal records. What we have down in the basement, in our storage area, we have the Journal of the Board of Aldermen, as it was known in the mid to late 1900s. And today, here we have the journals from the 1930s with the old leather binding. So looking at 1932, you know, what can you find in this sort of municipal record? How is it going to help you doing genealogy research? If you're looking for someone who filed a claim or a petition with the city, with the Board of Aldermen, it's going to be listed here in this documentation. And in a number of these years, they do, in fact, list everyone alphabetically. So there's some really great information. Obviously, you're not going to find something for someone who didn't have any interaction with the city, but if they did, you're going to find it in here. And here's an example of the type of thing that you might find. So here are folks who were injured and claimed damages from the city for their injuries. Defective curbing on Pine and Cook Streets, defective manhole cover on the sidewalk, a whole bunch of things like that. Earlier on in the 1800s, it's called the Municipal Register for what we have in this period. And it's somewhat similar, not as comprehensive. This is really telling you all of the major names of people involved with the city government. And so again, here's our firefighters that I mentioned before. If you're looking for someone who's a firefighter, this will give you those list of names. Next up, voter registration records. This is something that came to us, in the middle of the pandemic. It was a couple, maybe it was 2 years ago now. It's all a blur. But the Registrar of Voters, which is located across the street in the Chase building, had on file voter registration records going way back, going into the 1800s, and they delivered them over here to the library so that we could store them more carefully and also make them available to researchers. So at the moment, we have them securely stored away. They're not yet accessible. This is something that we hope to be working on in the near future to make this information more readily accessible for the public. So here's some of the earlier voter registration books. So the 1880s, the 1890s. And here's one of those little quirks of history. So everyone knows that women got the right to vote in the 1920s, but here is a list of women voters in 1898. So this is going to make you wonder what's going on. This is something that, and here's the articles from the newspapers, just given that overview. We don't have to dig too deep in all of it, but in Connecticut, starting in 1893, women were allowed to vote in school elections. So women could vote for the Board of Ed, basically. They could not vote in general elections, but they could vote in the school board elections. So there's a whole bunch of articles here going into that information. It was very controversial. A lot of people were very upset about this idea of women voting even though it wasn't full voting privileges. So this article from 1893 says, now that the women have the privilege of voting, the next thing we might expect is to see them looking for office. Oh no, women running for office, terrible thing. Times have changed. So here, 1893 is the notice. So this is how people were notified that it was time to register to vote, where to go to register to vote, how to get it done. And then 1893, for Connecticut, just over 4,000 women voted. So, not everyone, a lot of women actually didn't want to vote. They, felt it was not a good idea. But Waterbury actually had a respectable number, had 865 women who stepped out to vote for the very first time. So that takes us to this book from 1898. So these are women who are voting in the school elections. And it's organized alphabetically, by voting district. So the A's broken down 3rd, 4th, 5th. The B's, the 1st district, 2nd district, 3rd district, 4th district. A lot of Irish women. When I've looked through this book, there are a lot of Irish names on this list. We did put a scan of this specific book onto our website. So when you go to our website, to the local history and genealogy page, all of the pages from this voter registration book are listed there. So the C's, L's, just giving you an overview. Again, lots of Irish names. And then 1922, so now women have full voting rights. And so here's the voter registration book. And again, we're looking at now, not alphabetical by name, but alphabetical by street, who resides at each street, who is registered to vote. So this is, one of those, this is a completely unique collection item. If you're looking for, really in-depth genealogical research, as I said, it's not the only thing that we have available online right now is that earlier book of women voters. Eventually, we're going to be able to make all of this accessible for folks to look through. Zooming in so you can get a better sense. World War II. This is something that our librarians put together as the war was happening. They were creating an archival record of everything that went on, and a lot of the actual war effort documents for the city wound up here at the library. So again, this is something that is a really great resource, but we don't have the best access available for it yet, but we're hoping to make it more broadly accessible in the next few years. So we have service records. So every Waterbury man who served during World War II, we have their service record card. At least hopefully it's a complete complete record of all of the men who served. And those cards look like this. So very basic information, the town, name, address, date of birth. They didn't fill out. Most of these are just as blank as this one. I did a quick look to see if there was one with more information, and there wasn't, but it does give you at least some information if you're looking for somebody who you think was in Waterbury during the 1940s, who might have served during the war. This is a really good place to check. And then these cards, so we have a whole bunch of things, and you can see how a lot of this stuff is stored. So bond rallies. The bond rallies that were held were a way to raise money for the war effort. And these are cards indicating specifically that children were buying, or people were buying for the children, bonds for them. So this is giving you information about the name of the child, where they purchased the bond, the serial number of the bond, and it will also give you the name of their parent. For the question there in the chat, I believe that we do have World War II era voter registration cards. So that's something that we haven't been able to really dig into yet, but I believe that we do have voter registration information from World War II. So that's absolutely something we can look into. So for the cards, for the bonds, so this is, as the card says, this is June 13th, 1944 that they've got typed out there. The bond in the name of Miss Carol Lou Dinsmore, entitling our child to a certificate designed by Walt Disney. This caught my attention. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. So I did a quick Google search and found an example of exactly what it was. So this is something that people here were buying for children. This little cute little Walt Disney, all the little characters there. This is to certify that you fill in the name of the child as the owner of a war bond, thereby becoming an investor in this country's fight for human liberty and a contributor in a world struggle to make life free and forever peaceful for all men. And then again, with all the Disney characters. So that is what this little index card is telling us was issued to this child. And you know, if you look at this box, that's a lot of index cards that are in there. We have others that are a little more chaotic. So this is for the community gardens, the Victory Gardens, gardening for the war effort. So this is now where people could sign up to contribute, to help out with the community garden for the war effort. So you, in this case, I desire a plot in the community garden area. Alternatively, you could register your own backyard garden and then indicate what you have or do not have experience with, whether or not you're willing to help others learn how to garden. This one is a little different from how we see things today in this modern world. This little box does in fact give an indication of what's inside, the Keep 'em Smoking Fund. You open the box, this is all stuff that needs to be transferred to better storage to help it last longer and make it more accessible. And you pull out the cards, it is the Keep 'em Smoking Committee of Zenda Grotto over at the Masonic Temple. This is a postcard. So here's one side of the postcard, free to mail. And here's an example of what is on the other side of the postcard. So this is not just specific to Waterbury. This was a national effort to make sure that all of the soldiers fighting overseas had cigarettes. Big national effort, make sure that you keep them smoking, keep them supplied with cigarettes. And so, as the card indicates, once you receive the cigarettes that were sent to you, send the card back with your address to make sure that we can keep sending you your cigarettes. And so here, the name, address, and Corporal Meadows has added his remark. After a long, hard trip through many POs, the last cigarettes arrived here in England. I really appreciate them very much. Thanks for sending them. This is something that, again, this is this great little collection of these postcards that could, give you just a little bit of information about somebody who served that you might not have otherwise had. Atlases. These are, again, something that you probably have seen. Some things are online, but there are some things that we have that are very specifically not online, and these are great resources. So the 1879 Atlas for the city of Waterbury, we have in our storage in this building. I have never been able to find a copy of it online. So the Atlas, and this is an important part for understanding Waterbury history. The city of Waterbury was just this area that you see on this map here. what we think of as Waterbury was both the city, which was the center part, and the town, which was everything on the outside of the city. So everything in the outer parts of Waterbury was part of the town government for Waterbury. We had two governments existing at the same time for Waterbury, so that can be a little confusing. So for the city of Waterbury, we have this atlas. It's organized, broken down into the letters of the alphabet here. And this is the type of information you're going to find on it. The 1879 atlas is really fantastic because it will give you, in many cases, the name of the owner of a building. So if you're looking for someone who owned their own home, this is going to give you some really great detail. It's not just the location, but it gives you a reasonably accurate outline of what the house was like. So this is looking at South Main Street, coming down on that pink line diagonal. On the left-hand side, it indicates Pine Hill. That's not there anymore. That was removed. It was basically glacial till. It was a small hill full of rubble that was removed, and they built a factory on top of it. So zooming in a little bit further, you can see where the factories were. You can see the railroad lines. You can see the water. It shows you where the names of all of the companies are. It shows you the different building types. You've got the brick buildings, you've got wood buildings. In here, so South Main Street, Dover Street, Clay Street, Liberty Street, so down in the south end, we're looking right about where St. Anne's Church was built later. So in this period, in 1879, it looks like there's a couple of mansions actually on South Main Street. And you can see the dotted lines showing you where they had their private drives that would go around the house. So there's a lot of detail in these old atlases. 1896 atlas also I have not seen online. It doesn't give you the same amount of detail, but it does still give you quite a lot of information if you're trying to piece together what the neighborhood looked like when your ancestor lived there. Zooming in again, it's showing you where the factories are. And in this case, it gives you the street numbers. So you could take the city directory and then look at the atlas to see exactly where they lived. Another page. The downtown area has, in some cases, a little bit more information about all of the businesses, more information about what is where. And again, the outlines of the buildings are relatively accurate. They did a pretty good job with the accuracy there. Zooming in again here. You can see the old Immaculate Conception Church that was on East Main Street, where Yukon Waterbury is now. And again, these are all things that we're going to be working on getting digitized, getting them online. But in the meantime, if you want to have access to them, you can come to the library, you can go to the reference desk, you can talk to them about what you're trying to do and ask for access to these specific collections, and they'll bring them upstairs to the main reading room for you to use. And so that is the very quick overview of a portion of the collections. Next month, when I do this, I'm going to cover more things. So one of the things I can do for next month, for that question about World War II voter registration cards, is that I can dig further into that, unless you can come in before in person, but I can definitely dig more into that to see what else we have there. We also will be looking at our park department collections. There's a whole bunch of other things that we have that are really great resources. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the recorded part of this so that we can switch over to question and answer if there's anything specific that you're looking for, so that you can get all those questions answered.